Хочешь посмотреть эксклюзивный и очень горячий контент 18+ по Наруто? Тогда заходи на мой Бусти. Ссылка в описании, и приятного просмотра хента.
This story, dear readers, like all stories worth any attention, begins at the end. More precisely, since the death of old Lord Ashina Uzumaki, Viscount St. Joyce, the owner of large estates in Nottinghamshire with an income of £50,000 a year, while his only son died suddenly the previous year, leaving no male heirs, but leaving a daughter, who now, together with her majestic grandmother, was tensely awaiting a letter from the new heir, about whom none of them knew anything, except that he was old, practically a beggar, and had long had some prospects for the inheritance. And so for the third week morning reigned in the old mansion on Wimpole Street, while spring outside was only beginning to blossom, and the sunny days did not at all dispose the young lady to black. "This is unbearable," she suddenly cried, throwing down her embroidery, waving her red hair, which was too bright for the current situation. "What should I do now?" She went to the window and could only sigh dejectedly, looking at the sun. "The season will soon begin. Am I really not going out this year?" "There are still 2 months until the season starts," Karen, her venerable grandmother, sitting at the table and immersed in papers and bills, said indifferently. "We have more serious problems than your dresses and skirts right now." "More importantly," exclaimed the girl, "I have dreamed of this day since I was 9, and you propose to wait another season, or worse, to marry an old uncle unknown to me." "I didn't say that at all," the lady raised her head, looking offended. "I only said that it would be to our advantage, to have our estate managed by a beggar. No, thank you very much." And he didn't even deign to answer us. "One must think that this, as you put it, beggar has more important things to do than some 50,000, while the inheritance could very well go to me or my future son. Just look at these bills." The widow clucked her tongue in displeasure, ignoring her granddaughter's torment. "How can you waste so much on gambling?" "So it's all yours, Grandma," the offended Karen did not fail to sarcastically remind. "What a wretch," the lady hissed. "Where is your governess? Go and entertain her. I suppose her ears have not heard your most entertaining complaints today." "And I suppose that my cher grandmaman's memory has begun to fail me in my old age," Miss Uzumaki retorted. "Otherwise, she would have remembered that Miss Terumi left a week ago." "Why would she want to leave?" the lady asked incredulously. "I finished my studies a long time ago." Dissatisfied Karen took up her long-suffering embroidery again. "And she still hopes to get married." "As if that's possible," the lady chuckled. "At 32 years old." "It may soon be impossible for me too," Karen muttered quietly. "I beg your pardon, Lady Senju," the housekeeper interrupted their conversation as she appeared at the door, "but a letter has arrived. You asked to be notified as soon as—" "A letter?" Karen exclaimed, impatiently snatching it from the stunned Shizen's hands. "Really? After all this time?" "Karen," the Countess reproached her charge. "A young lady is not supposed to—" "Impossible!" Karen interrupted excitedly, not listening to her, already running her eyes over the lines. "Just listen. I apologize for the delay, Viscount. Your message has reached me, here. Forgive me, but I suppose there has been some kind of mistake." "A mistake, can you imagine? My uncle has long since died. As, incidentally, have my parents." "He thinks that makes him special?" "Now, give me that letter," Lady Senju ordered, unable to make out this interrupted narrative, but stopped short. "What is this mournful look?" "Oh, Mamie? Grandmother, French, he's only 26, exclaimed Karen, handing the message to her venerable grandmother with a sorrowful expression. "As soon as he gets married, all our fortune is gone. That's why I'm telling you it would be preferable," the old lady muttered, reading the writing sullenly. "What a scoundrel. He writes, mistake. Of course it's a mistake. Not so much in the word itself, but in the fact that he managed to be born with the surname Uzumaki. It's a mistake for him, you see, that by birthright he only gets 50,000 in annual income. To be fair, the letter really wasn't intended for him," Miss Uzumaki responded discontentedly. "If I had made such a mistake, you know, in his place I would not have admitted it. With his income, he should have considered it a blessing. £600, just think of it." The Countess continued to be amazed. "And he still works. And what a job. A clerk in a wretched office. And he is not even ashamed to admit it. Now this is, I tell you, a subject, an outstanding example for the English aristocracy, especially from our family, which for so long has not had a good reason for gossip in the world. Who is interested in hearing about old people now, when there is an excellent chance to ruin the reputation of some young gentleman or lady? Snorting, the Countess threw the letter on the table, already covered with a pile of papers. Karen just sighed, looking at her embroidery, which was far from finished, and after some thoughtfulness, reluctantly admitted. When you put it that way, Grandma, I get the feeling that marrying him really is the only way out of our situation. Married? Lady Senju croaked mockingly. If this cousin of yours comes before you go out into society, you will soon share the fate of your governess. Mom! Karen exclaimed in horror. Look here, the Countess said, pursing her lips, having calmed down a little, if we have to become the subject of discussions this season, then let them have something to talk about. Your debut should smooth out the general impression, because it will show society brilliant manners and education, which the rest cannot boast of. Tomorrow we will go to the milliner to lengthen your skirts and order dresses. Oh, and gloves, where would we be without them? Karen could hardly sit still after hearing the cherished words. However, she wondered if it was worth thanking her cousin for this. After all, every young lady, imagining her first appearance, imagines herself as a sparkling diamond with the best attire, surrounded by attention and compliments on all sides, while in the ball book all the dances are already scheduled half an hour after the start of the ball. And for that reason, to seem even just ordinary solely because of an unsuccessful escort is almost akin to a disaster. Countess Senju understood perfectly well all the tossing and turning of the young soul, and therefore reluctantly took up the pen. It will be necessary to hire the best teachers of dancing, etiquette, Latin, history and other important sciences, capable of teaching the young Viscount in the shortest possible time. Well, for now. Share Mr. Uzumaki. After a moment's hesitation, the Countess took a new sheet of paper. Perhaps it would be a bad idea to use French in this letter. Meanwhile, society was in full swing. Families returning from their country estates were furnishing their London mansions, the clubs were filling up with gentlemen, and on Bond Street the fashion makers were already setting the tone for the coming season. However, there was another reason why many girls, not to mention debutantes, were especially diligent in their preening. There was a rumor that Mr. Sasuke Uchiha, who served as an officer with the rank of captain in one of the cavalry regiments, was taking a vacation this time, which meant that this season both Uchiha brothers would be participating in social life to the delight of all the mothers of unmarried ladies. However, this was not yet known at Wimpole Street, nor was it known of any other fresh news, for the new Lord St. Joyce was arriving from Birmingham that day, and about whom Karen and the old Dowager Countess had the most gloomy thoughts. You know, Grandma man, we really can tell him that there was a mistake, Miss Uzumaki said with some doubt, looking from the threshold at her cousin awkwardly jumping out of the cab. And wait and hope that your marriage, if it ever happens, will bring something other than your ruined youth? The Countess responded, smiling kindly at the Viscount, who was looking around the mansion in amazement, and patiently waiting for him to finally deign to turn his attention to them. Nobody wears frock coats like that these days, Karen noted with a hint of hostility and added, he's not even a gentleman, is it decent to stare like that? Well, that's why I'm here, my dear, sighed Lady Senju. Better young and inexperienced than an old, stingy brute, and, smiling even wider, she exclaimed, Ah, Lord Uzumaki, it's you. The newly minted lord shuddered in surprise, losing a couple more points on Karen's mental account, but then he smiled so much that, after thinking for a bit, she returned them back. Indeed, maybe Granny was right. You must be Lady Senju, Mr. Uzumaki bowed. I am very sorry for your grief. Karen looked eloquently at her grandmother, who had no reason to grieve, except, of course, for her daughter, who was Karen's mother, but who had died at the moment of her birth, that is, 18 years ago. Of course you sympathize, Lord Uzumaki, there is no doubt about it, the Countess responded in her usual manner. Miss Uzumaki, she introduced her granddaughter, your cousin, I believe. Karen only had enough politeness to nod at him with a smile. You look lovely, Mr. Uzumaki remarked, looking around for his luggage, only to discover that the footman had already taken care of it. Oh, he blurted out, this is all a bit unexpected. Believe me, For us too, Countess Senju slowly led the Viscount by the arm to the mansion. I suppose you didn't dare hope for such a happy occasion. Why not? Mr. Uzumaki smiled again. It must be admitted that he had mastered his smile to such a degree that he could excuse all his imperfections with it. I confess, I intended to enter your circle one day, to acquire good land somewhere in Somerset. However, in one thing you are right, he laughed. I did not suspect that something like this could happen so soon. The Countess smiled pleasantly at his words, but Karen suspected that she was actually horrified. As an implacable opponent of the new nobility, and in particular the gentry and nouveau riche, the realization that the lands would now be owned by someone little different from them should have caused her furious indignation. To acquire, repeated Lady Senju, with some hesitation. With an income of only £600? That's not counting my personal earnings, my lady. Mr. Uzumaki bowed his head, not noticing the disdain hidden in her voice. Besides, I was thinking of starting to sell wool and grain. I've heard that you can make good money from that. They walked down the hall in silence. It goes without saying how gloomy it was. Well, said the Countess at last, it must be a relief that you don't have to think about it now. 50,000 is no small sum, don't you think? And without giving the Viscount a chance to reply, she called the footman. Show the Viscount to his rooms. Dinner is in 2 hours, my lord. You'll have time to rest and change. As soon as he left, Karen began to tensely expect an explosion. And so, taking up the book, she became defensive, since, having fallen into the heat of the moment, she understood that accusations could rain down on her too. But as soon as the Countess took a deep breath and opened her mouth, the door opened. Mr. Uchiha and Mr. Sasuke Uchiha have come to see you, my lady, the butler reported, saving Karen from an unenviable fate. But... Mr. Sasuke? She gasped in surprise, realizing what had been said. He's back? Indeed, Lady Senju frowned. I don't remember Itachi mentioning that. It is probably worth noting that the Uchiha brothers were the closest friends of the Uzumaki family, and therefore were always welcome in their home, while the Countess herself proudly considered these gentlemen her confidants. But I suppose we'll find out for ourselves now, she said, nodding to the butler. Ask them. At last, decent Englishman, the lady emphasized. Otherwise, I'd soon begin to think that marrying my daughter to your good-for-nothing father wasn't the worst idea. Naruto Uzumaki was the type of person who never felt out of place anywhere. Be it in the company of farmers or simple workers, gentlemen in some club or even ladies in this very mansion. He preferred to stick to the simple position that if something happens and it cannot be changed, then that is how it should be. Although most people of this sort are unaware that they are not really welcome anywhere, in Mr. Uzumaki's case, with rare exceptions, this rule did not correspond to reality. And he himself was not in the habit of delving into such thoughts. Living in a constant rush solely because of the desire to achieve his main goal, to succeed, he absolutely did not have enough time to stop and think at one moment. Reflection, in his usual opinion, was the lot of philosophers and idlers. And so now, being freed from these very affairs, his consciousness could not comprehend and accept the fact that there was nothing more to strive for. 50,000. He had never even dreamed of such a sum. Just imagining it in his head, Naruto couldn't figure out how to distribute it. Of course, the larger the estate, the greater the responsibility. And how much there is to consider. What kind of land is there in St. Joyce? How big is the arable land and pastures? How are the farmers doing? Isn't rent taking away the last of their money? Perhaps the first thing to do is to look at the bills. Although, no, he came to the conclusion after some thought. First of all, he needed to settle relations with this quarrelsome lady, who had withered away in the prejudices of the last century. And then the bills. Changing clothes, what a wonderful idea. In the living room that one of the footmen led him into, there was someone else besides the inhabitants of the mansion, which was not to Naruto's advantage, as he was hoping for a quick resolution to the misunderstanding, but he readily accepted this state of affairs and smiled affably while he was being introduced. One glance at the two gentlemen, comfortably seated in light English striped chairs, showed that they were people of noble birth. And it was not a matter of their upright posture, well-cut suits, or unhurried movements, but of their faces, as if intended exclusively for two emotions, for courtesy and boredom. A great honor, Lord Uchiha smiled, demonstrating the first of these features. Captain Sasuke Uchiha's silent handshake clearly reflected the second. Cattenhall and Nottingham are our neighbors and closest friends, Lady Senju commented reasonably, lifting her chin majestically. I hope that we will continue to maintain this friendship, Naruto noted, intuitively understanding that this was exactly what was expected of him. Lord Uchiha smiled, but the younger brother's expression remained impassive as he turned to Miss Uzumaki and said ironically, positively, until someone gets tired of pretending to be a grateful chosen one of chance. I'm sorry? You're being unfair, Sasuke, Karen said quickly, glancing sideways at Naruto, who was taken aback by this remark. Mr. Uzumaki treated us quite kindly. In that case, hope that his goodwill will last until the moment when it will be necessary to give out your dowry, the Uchiha captain snorted, and Karen looked up at him in surprise, and her cheek slightly blushed. An indignant Naruto opened his mouth to tell this gentleman everything he thought of him, but Lady Senju, who had been talking to Mr. Uchiha the whole time, was everywhere. However, Sasuke, you came rather unexpectedly. Not a letter, not even a note. Who does that? I'm afraid it's my fault, Lady Senju, Lord Uchiha answered for his brother. He mentioned it in his last letter, and I haven't had a chance to see you since. And then, the Viscount's death. Yes, leave these formalities, Itachi, we all know perfectly well that no one here is grieving at all, the Countess waved her hand. Especially our new acquaintance, Captain Sasuke Uchiha added in a low voice, again addressing Miss Uzumaki, and she blushed either from shame or embarrassment. Then, Sasuke, where's your uniform? The Countess snapped at him, nipping any possible quarrels in the bud. You've matured during your absence. How your shoulders have broadened. I think I'll convey the general idea if I say that red should suit you very well, don't you think, Karen? Karen cast a reproachful glance at her grandmother, apparently not at all in the mood to express her opinion on what was and was not suitable for Sasuke. Come on, Sasuke is still too skinny, laughed Lord Uchiha, who was very good at recognizing changes in mood in a conversation. Not at all, Miss Karen objected in defense of her friend, who in turn only managed a wry smile when he finally answered. I find the uniform uncomfortable, Lady Senju, he said, standing up to walk sedately to the window. And it's a shame, she said in a peremptory tone, turning to him. If you want to find yourself a decent bride, Sasuke, you should look the part. He is incorrigible, Lady Senju, Lord Uchiha smiled, smoothing over the situation. Sasuke is impossible to persuade. Doesn't a uniform exist only to hide one's identity? Mr. Sasuke said indifferently. Despite what he had said, one could still see the military bearing in his demeanor even without his uniform. Are you really asking me to flaunt my wealth and status? My dear, the Countess retorted, it would be better for you to flaunt them rather than your wit. Karen blushed with shame, Lord Uchiha remained tactfully silent, while Naruto couldn't help but laugh. Really, this lady could quickly gain his favor, as long as she continued to skillfully put people in their place. Unless, of course, her irony was directed at him. His laughter attracted everyone's attention, which could have been awkward, but Naruto was so genuinely cheerful that the Countess, it must be said, was flattered. And that, on the other hand, did not flatter the Uchiha captain at all, who, piercing Naruto with one sharp glance, returned to contemplating the garden outside the window, muttering something like, "This is what the entail system leads to, fools sneak into decent society," and, having waited a little until the fit of laughter subsided, he again turned to Lady Senju, "I have no intention of marrying, my lady, and therefore do not wish my epaulets to accidentally break any woman's heart. And especially, someone's mother's." This time Karen couldn't help but smile, she had heard enough about mothers who wouldn't leave her alone, both from the Uchihas themselves and from numerous acquaintances. Oh, everyone says that, Sasuke, Lady Senju nodded understandingly, and then they go on vacation just before the season starts. Naruto laughed shamelessly again. You have observed fairly, Lady Senju. And I thought that putting on an unapproachable air was no longer in fashion? Do you know anything about fashion, Mr. Uzumaki? Mr. Sasuke asked with interest and looked at his outfit eloquently. Here, dear readers, a very entertaining squabble could have unfolded, judging by the dangerous appraising glances that our new acquaintances exchanged, if the footman had not announced so opportunely that dinner had been served. You must stay, Lady Senju declared when Lord Uchiha was about to take his leave, citing business in London, although he was obviously looking for a way to avoid any kind of quarrel. And this is not up for discussion, Itachi, she cut off all his attempts. I practically raised you, where is your respect? And so, in this way, the same company settled down in the dining room, and Naruto, in the absence of a third lady, was forced to sit between Miss Karen and Mr. Sasuke, who, it must be said, was equally dissatisfied with such a neighborhood. Not wanting to spoil anyone's appetite or embarrass Lord Uchiha again, who had impressed Naruto as a completely positive person, unlike his brother, he decided to ignore the existence of the object of irritation, and therefore engage his cousin in conversation, while Viscount Uchiha himself entertained his respectable aunt with conversation, well, or vice versa, depending on how you look at it. Ever been to Birmingham, miss? Naruto asked, spooning soup into his mouth. I'm sure you'd love it. You think so, she responded without much enthusiasm. Grandma Man said that there were only machines there, and industry, unfortunately, is not in my circle of interests, my lord. There was a snort from the left. Of course, there's nothing surprising about that, Karen, because that's the lot of men. I beg your pardon, Mr. Sasuke immediately corrected himself, working-class men. I wasn't just talking about industry, dear cousin, Naruto continued, ignoring the insolent man. Did you know that this city is famous for its jewelry? They make some very fine jewelry there. Really? She perked up, moving closer. No, I didn't know, did you, Sasuke? I haven't had a chance to check it out, he answered reservedly, cutting the fish with a knife. I don't know anyone from Birmingham who could bring any of these works of art and allow us to see them with our own eyes. This was an obvious hint towards Naruto, who did not have the opportunity to present his female relatives with any expensive gifts. Well, he admitted with a grin and bowed his head in agreement, as you so deign to say, Mr. Uchiha, Birmingham is a city of workers and merchants. However, despite my current position, unlike some arrogant aristocrats, I will not neglect to get acquainted with some of them, and perhaps soon you will be able to fully appreciate the local jewelry craftsmanship. Unless, of course, you are prejudiced against the idea that anyone who is not born a lord is not capable of anything worthwhile. I beg your pardon, he suddenly corrected himself guiltily, it involuntarily slipped my mind, younger sons are not born to be lords, after all. The unexpected kick under the table almost made Naruto yelp in surprise. He looked at his cousin in surprise, who only smiled innocently, returning to her interrupted meal, but that smile did not deceive him at all. Of course, a new person suddenly dared to unequivocally insult an old friend. However, Naruto would not apologize even if he wanted to. He could not stand snobs. And apparently the barb worked, judging by how white the knuckles of Captain Uchiha's hand turned as he gripped his fork too tightly. You must have friends in the Midlands, Lord Uzumaki? Viscount Uchiha suddenly intervened, along with the Countess, who seemed to have decided to take the place of a distraction in this tense company. To be honest, Naruto smiled as if nothing had happened. I didn't have much time to be friends with anyone, but you're right, there really are quite a few good friends of mine left there, people I knew from school, those were good days. Did you go to Rugby or Shrewsbury? Private boarding schools in the Midlands, the Countess asked, as if it was self-evident that Naruto had been educated at a boarding school rather than an ordinary country school. Or maybe Eton? The most prestigious private boarding school for boys? Captain Uchiha now goaded even more fiercely. Speaking of Eton, Lord Uchiha must have realized the true state of affairs before anyone else, since he was able to so cleverly steer the conversation in another direction. Sasuke, you and Hozuki studied there together, didn't you? And added, to clarify for the others, Sasuke came with a friend. He will be visiting us this season. What do you mean with a friend? The Countess was surprised and for some reason looked around, as if he was hiding somewhere here. Why can't I see him? I wouldn't drag him along without an invitation, Lady Senju, Captain Uchiha responded indifferently, apparently having managed to pull himself together, and returned to the fish. And don't worry, Hozuki is having a great time at the club right now, but I wouldn't call him a friend, he was just asking me for a favor. His older brother, Sir Mangetsu Hozuki, doesn't enjoy being in society, and therefore rarely appears in London, and my acquaintance is not the type to sit out his entire vacation in the country. Charming, the Countess concluded, smiling strangely contentedly. New faces are always good, and Karen's debut, and it seems that some of our acquaintances are about to start coming out. Hyuga, I think? Someone else? She looked proudly at each of her charges, and although her smile darkened somewhat when it was Naruto's turn, she had no doubt in her next words. One of you will certainly marry soon, she declared almost imperatively. This is a very promising season. The new day for our hero began not with breakfast, but with a man suddenly appearing in his room in a uniform and with a somewhat sinister smile that did not bode well. What the hell? Naruto jumped up on the bed as he realized that the guest was not the object of his imagination. Not the devil, sir, the man replied, still with the same grin on his lips. From here it seemed that it was still more of a grin than a polite smile. Bijou Kurama, my lord, he bowed. Your valet. A room servant for a master in a wealthy noble house. A valet is the second in the hierarchy of servants in the house after the butler and enjoys the special trust of his master. Naruto stared at him stupidly. The man stared back, only confusing his thoughts further. This red-haired man with a little gray at the temples, who looked to be in his 40s, seemed to be mocking him with his gaze alone. I've never had a valet, Naruto finally said, ruffling the hair on the back of his head. Yes, sir, the man continued to grin, showing his unusually white teeth. Why are you smiling, sir? Naruto couldn't help but raise his chin defiantly. Do you think I'm funny? When you stare like that, certainly, my lord, Mr. Kurama replied calmly. You're staring too, Naruto snapped at him and threw off the blanket indignantly. Of course, sir, since you're not wearing any underwear, the valet's eyebrows rose, but nothing else on his face showed surprise. Even the grin remained in place. Aren't you afraid of catching a fever? Not at all. It's convenient, he shrugged, looking for his shirt. I can't stand it when something prevents me from sleeping. You can laugh about it, he allowed and waved his hand. It doesn't offend me. You mean flattering? The grin, somewhat reminiscent of a fox's, became even wider. Naruto laughed, standing in the middle of the room with his hands on his hips. You are original, Mr. Kurama, he squinted, pointing a finger at him to emphasize his words. I like original people. Who hired you? The Countess? He suddenly looked around, puzzled. I have no idea how we're going to work together. Oh, it's very simple, sir, Mr. Kurama elegantly pulled up his white glove. You will stand, and I will dress you. Well, I'll pull on my underwear somehow, Naruto grinned and picked them up from the floor as proof. I meant the estate and the bills. For a start, you are not dressed yet, the valet commented. In addition, you already have a visit to the tailor scheduled, and several meetings have been arranged by Countess Senju this afternoon. The papers can be looked at this evening. Naruto was dumbfounded. Someone was deciding how he was going to spend his day for him. Unthinkable. No way. If he left things like this from the start, the Countess might think she had the right to control him, which didn't suit him at all. There was a knock at the door, preventing him from suddenly throwing out his valet in a fit of irritation, solely because he had been hired by the Countess. Cousin, came a muffled voice from outside. Damn it, Naruto muttered, looking down at himself, still dressed in just his underwear. Still Bijou Kurama, sir, the valet said calmly. Naruto snorted and quickly pulled his shirt over his head. I'll be downstairs in 5 minutes, Miss Uzumaki, he said, quickly buttoning his shirt. The valet looked at him silently for a moment, and then, still silently, began to button a clean collar onto his shirt. No, not in front of Mamie, they all answered in the same muffled voice from behind the door. Naruto looked at the valet, but he just shrugged, grinned in his usual manner, and moved on to the pants. I hope this has nothing to do with Mr. Sasuke Uchiha? Naruto guessed. Why with him right away? Miss Karen was indignant. I don't know, maybe because you kicked me, he asked, while Mr. Kurama was deliberately calmly fastening his suspenders to his trousers and adjusting their length. I didn't kick. Oh, are you really in love? Naruto chuckled, adopting his servant's composure and submitting himself to his hands. It turns out that some things are even easier. Not at all. Miss Karen flared up. Well, he chuckled. In that case, you can come in, he shrugged, because Mr. Kurama was already straightening his vest. The door opened and Miss Uzumaki, preparing to enter, suddenly stopped at the threshold. "Kurama?" she asked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" "Miss Uzumaki," he bowed politely. "I'm helping my lord get dressed." "But you are a lackey." "A footman?" Naruto smiled broadly and contentedly, rubbing his palms together. How well everything was working out. "No, Miss Uzumaki, he is a valet now." "That's what I ordered." Mr. Kurama's expression didn't change at all. Only his grin seemed to become more predatory than before. The man really knows how to get his way. Wonderful. Miss Karen waved her hand. "Please come out, Kurama." "Breakfast in 10 minutes, my lord," he warned and took his leave. "What's the matter, Miss Uzumaki?" Naruto asked, looking at himself in the mirror with a critical eye. He looked quite decent, and what difference did it make if he wasn't in fashion? He had never wanted to be a dandy. A 19th century socio-cultural type, a man who emphasized the gloss of his appearance and behavior. Karen took a deep breath. "Cousin, I'll speak frankly. The behavior you demonstrated yesterday is unacceptable. Your manners, inappropriate jokes, insults. And cheese. How can you eat cheese?" "What's wrong with the cheese?" Naruto asked, looking at her through the mirror. "Food for common people." "But it was on the table," he said indignantly. "Not to be eaten." Naruto burst out laughing. "I've never heard of anyone not being able to eat cheese." "The way Sasuke looked at you." Karen lamented, burning with shame. "He must have been jealous," Naruto mocked, still amused, and adjusted his neckerchief. "After all, I ate cheese, and he didn't. And the cheese, by the way, was delicious." "Stop it. Listen, what do you want from me?" Naruto turned to her. "If I'm being completely honest, I can't stand this boring beating around the bush." Karen had many answers prepared for this question, but from such a frank look into his eyes, her ardor cooled somewhat, and without him she was at a loss. The cousin's undisguised frankness was discouraging. "Come on?" he urged. What couldn't be said in front of the countess? "Cheese? Don't look like that." Karen couldn't stand such a penetrating gaze. "Yeah, it's Sasuke Uchiha after all." Mr. Uzumaki narrowed his eyes. "Not at all," she clasped her hands. "Whatever you imagine, Miss Uzumaki, you will not marry him," he said curtly. "How could you?" Karen flared up. "Why did you even decide that It's not up to you to decide." "You're wrong," the cousin smiled innocently. "It's up to me to decide," he even winked, completely confusing Karen, who wasn't used to such liberties. "Perhaps you've forgotten, but I'm responsible for you now. And I won't let you marry Mr. Sasuke unless he somehow gives up his determined intention to remain a bachelor and changes. But believe me, I know very well that people like him rarely change." "How do you know anything about the life of a gentleman?" "Oh, my dear cousin, there is absolutely no need for young ladies to know about this," he chuckled. "What do you propose?" She narrowed her eyes. "Will you reject all my suitors? Since from now on you are responsible for me, then I guarantee that I will not find anyone more worthy." "Why do you value yourself so low?" he asked in surprise. "I wasn't talking about myself," Karen said angrily, blushing. Naruto laughed, clearly mocking her vehemence. "I insist, sir, that you stop behaving so insolently." She became even more indignant and even stamped her foot in annoyance. "There's no need to react so violently, Karen," Naruto tried to calm her down. "I didn't give you permission to address me by my name." "And I give you mine," he said calmly. "To begin with, you don't know me at all. My manners may be a little rough, but that doesn't mean I'm a man without honor. Do you really think that I wish you harm?" "For what reason?" "You are too prejudiced against Sasuke," Karen pursed her lips. "And you are all against me," the cousin smiled broadly. "However, I assure you that I will not hinder your happiness if I am truly sure that it will be happiness for you. You can only help me with this if you stop embarrassing me in front of others." "You don't have to worry about that," Naruto laughed. "I'm convinced that your friend is simply impossible to please, and I'm not one to flatter. And so, if he's determined to marry you, then he'll have to please me. Until then, you shouldn't seek his favor." Don't you want to see him despair? He coaxed. And, frankly, it sounded quite appealing. Karen was silent, and Naruto grinned contentedly and took the watch on a chain from the table. It's breakfast time, Miss Uzumaki, he warned. You can call me Karen, she said proudly and walked towards the exit with her head held high. Breakfast had barely ended when Naruto said to the Countess. I need to leave now, but when I arrive I want to talk to the manager. But didn't you make an appointment for after dinner? Lady Senju asked in surprise. No, I didn't plan any meetings today other than the ones I mentioned, Naruto frowned. Really? The Countess raised her eyebrows. And why did Kurama send out invitations? History, Latin, dancing, fencing? By the way, I would like to note, Mr. Uzumaki, that appointing Kurama as a valet was a very wise decision on your part. Naruto was a little confused. Either this woman really didn't have anything in mind, or she was very skillfully pretending to. And judging by how she introduced herself to Naruto, one could safely assume that the latter was true. I am not easy to manipulate, Lady Senju, he smiled wryly. I appreciate your concern, but there is no need for all this. I can dance and I know history quite well. It is too late for me to learn fencing, and I see no point in Latin, unless I have to compete in snobbery with your dear Mr. Sasuke. Do you want to lose? She chuckled. Naruto was taken aback at first, but then laughed cheerfully. This woman really is unusually witty. Oh, you must have noticed, I don't like losing at all. But here's the thing, Lady Senju, he said, to win at snobbery is the same as losing to me. So cancel all these meetings, I need to talk to the manager. It would be extremely impolite, Mr. Uzumaki, to cancel the meeting right before it, the Countess responded discontentedly. Tenzo is doing an excellent job of his duties. And I believe he will continue to do so without your direct participation. Naruto sighed in annoyance and stood up. He wished he could skip this boring monologue, but as mentioned, he couldn't stand beating around the bush. You cannot bear me as I am, he said. Perhaps I should abolish the tailor, too, don't you think? You wouldn't wish your friends to know that your family are anything but perfect? I suppose you consider education and wealth synonymous with gentlemen? But it is not my fault that I was not rich, or that I did not have the opportunity to go to Eton and Oxford, and if you are so averse to having an uneducated man like me among your relations, you might have shared your wealth with my family, but I thank you for not doing so. Do you know what, Lady Senju? He looked at her defiantly, pulling on his gloves. The lands in the Midlands barely amounted to 200 pounds before I took charge of them. I am as content with what I have as with what I am. I have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of, because I made a name for myself, and in order to be respected, I never needed to have an extra 1,000 pounds in my wallet. Naruto rang the bell, and Mr. Kurama, who had been waiting for him, immediately entered the room. Allow me to take my leave. With these words he put his hat on his head and went out accompanied by his valet, leaving the old lady without a word. And believe me, dear readers, not everyone was capable of leaving the always well-spoken Countess Senju speechless. So, London, Naruto said, taking a deep breath and looking around. I thought Birmingham was a big city. It's only Savile Row, my lord, Mr. Kurama said. That doesn't mean anything to me, Naruto said with a smile. Do you want me to show you around the city? His valet asked him ingratiatingly. No. Not now, anyway. Good, because I didn't intend to do that anyway. He smiled and opened the door of one of the many studios on this street called Sasori and Company. How did they even accept you as a servant? Naruto laughed. I am an old friend of the late Viscount Uzumaki, Mr. Kurama began his story calmly. My family became poor and was forced to sell all our lands. I was the eldest in the family. There were 9 of us. Now we are all dead. What? Naruto was taken aback, stopping at the threshold. Is this true? No, he answered calmly. Or yes? He smiled again in his sinister manner. What do you think? I think, gentlemen, that this suit is absolutely no good, the owner of the establishment announced, forcing everyone to pay attention to him. He was a man of rather short stature, with a face that was more like a child's. Only his eyes and voice, which seemed too empty and lifeless for a young man, could give away his true age. I like bright colors. Naruto immediately protested. Mr. Sasori, if it was him, looked at him with that glassy gaze that people usually gave to people they thought were complete idiots. And coupled with his overly young face, it was also somewhat humiliating. Restraint is the fashion now, sir, the tailor summed up calmly and with a graceful movement of his finger beckoned him to the screen. Naruto had no choice but to start undressing. You can combine dark colors with bright neckerchiefs or a vest, Mr. Sasori said in the meantime, showing him several ready-made examples of different colors. Even pink ones, if you like. Naruto could have resisted and flatly refused to wear anything other than his usual attire, but he wasn't ready to sneer at anyone and everyone who dared to cast a disapproving glance at him. Sasuke Uchiha certainly deserved his due, but he had promised Karen not to embarrass her. So, gritting his teeth, he had to agree. I want an orange vest, he said simply, pulling his suspenders down from his shoulders. An excellent choice, my lord, the tailor responded reservedly and, having returned the orders to their place, began to take Naruto's measurements. Dressing beautifully is a whole art, did you know that? For me, perhaps all art is monotonous, Naruto shrugged, which earned him another dry look from the tailor, who was measuring the width of his shoulder at that moment. Suddenly, the bell above the workshop door rang, and Naruto looked at the person who entered over the screen that only covered him up to shoulder level. It was, who would have thought, Captain Sasuke Uchiha himself, which, frankly speaking, should not have been particularly surprising, because the Uchiha family mansion was located nearby on Piccadilly Street, and he, like all aristocrats, always had his suits tailored right here, on Savile Row. Captain Sasuke and Naruto locked eyes and froze for a moment of recognition. However, neither of them even nodded in greeting, as each of them expected the other to acknowledge their mistake in their first meeting and therefore offer an apology. And so, instead, they only deliberately ignored each other, which, in the end, only worsened the hostility between both. Mr. Kurama, who was standing near the door, upon seeing the guest, snorted something like, Uchiha and crossed his arms over his chest, and Mr. Sasori, who had to stand on tiptoe to recognize the person who entered, nodded respectfully. I didn't know you were back, Captain Uchiha, he said, and went back to his machinations of turning Naruto's body into numbers. The old suits are a bit small for me now, I haven't worn a tailcoat in a long time, Mr. Sasuke said dispassionately, looking around the room. Should I come back later, Akasuna? It seems you have a lot of work to do here. Not at all, despite the unhurried intonation, all the tailor's movements were quite deft, and from the competent movements of his fingers it was clear that this man knew his business. I'll be back soon. Really? Did Mr. Uzumaki just take my advice and decide to change his style? He asked without interest. Your advice? Naruto raised his eyebrows in surprise. Not at all. I don't recall such a thing, Mr. Uchiha. It seemed to me that you, on the contrary, were so delighted with him that it gave me the idea that he absolutely needed to be changed, and he smiled as if this remark could well be considered a friendly joke. Captain Sasuke gritted his teeth at this, seemingly ready to unleash another portion of insults along with his sarcasm, when Mr. Sasori, who was completely invisible from behind the screen, spoke up again. I thought you would be getting your clothes from Tsukuri now, Captain Uchiha. I don't make military clothes, after all, he said monotonously. And Mr. Uchiha, you know, doesn't like to boast about his position. Naruto couldn't keep his mouth shut. He's extremely modest. Modesty is a gentleman's trait, Mr. Sasori approved, which only made Naruto laugh even more. And also politeness, tact, and the ability to remain silent when necessary. Properties that are not inherent to you, I suppose? Mr. Sasuke responded coldly. Absolutely, Naruto smiled disarmingly again. I can't keep quiet. I've never met people before who so easily admit that they are not gentlemen, he snorted with obvious mockery. Well then, you're in for a rough time, aren't you? Naruto laughed in response. Sasuke felt himself boiling. He would have admitted that Mr. Uzumaki was a first-class opponent, if only that hadn't irritated him even more. And so it was that which made him respond. It's not as difficult as it is for you to try to seem like them now, when your current situation demands it of you. Count Uzumaki, as he himself admitted, did not know how to remain silent. However, winning an argument does not always mean that you need to have the last word. Sometimes, remaining silent means embarrassing your interlocutor even more. And now was just such a case. The words of the Uchiha captain hung in the silence that followed them, broken only by the fuss of Mr. Sasori, who had ignored the entire discussion that had taken place here. Naruto's gaze, directed at Mr. Sasuke, seemed to be filled with unspoken mockery. How often do you try to appear like a decent person, Mr. Uchiha? Meanwhile, making one forget all other concerns, the day inevitably approached, which everyone was eagerly awaiting, with the possible exception of those like Captain Sasuke Uchiha, in whom company, as usual, only caused nervous irritation. This day was the most important every year for all members of aristocratic families, and for some young girls it was even more important than their own wedding. The day when they were officially presented to the court, when their first London season could be considered open, in other words, the debutante ball. And while in Marylebone, a prestigious area in London, which includes Wimpole Street, Karen, with fear and excitement, practiced over and over again a deep curtsy and an intricate technique of gracefully catching the train on the crook of her elbow, and Naruto gradually delved into the affairs of the estate, simultaneously finding a common language with the household, in Mayfair, the most prestigious area of London, in one of the most famous gentlemen's clubs in London called Brook. Sasuke Uchiha barely dispelled boredom by playing hazard with his old acquaintance. It was already past midnight, and the club's regulars were not even thinking of leaving this place, except perhaps those who might have a scandal at home, or perhaps those chosen ones who were lucky enough to marry for love. 3. Hozuki clucked, losing again, and laid £5 on the table. Soon it will seem to me that you see the future. I see, Sasuke shrugged indifferently, taking his winnings and throwing the dice again. No excitement. A point for 8, he set the new main number. Why am I losing, and your face is filled with mortal anguish? Snorted his acquaintance, throwing up his own. Where is your enthusiasm? The first ball is coming soon. How long has it been since I was in London at the height of the season? We have a chance? Chance numbers from 4 to 10, with the exception of the main one, which must be hit the first time. To hit a chance after the first throw means to have the opportunity to throw the dice again. To hit a chance a second time means to win, he said, looking at the numbers that had come up. Sasuke glanced around the room, looking for something to catch his eye. At the next table, 4 gentlemen were busy playing whist, and one of them was playing very poorly, judging by the way his partner sighed with annoyance, or maybe he was bored too. Encouragement? Sasuke asked without interest, throwing the dice again. Strangling collars and conversations? I'd prefer the front. But you'll come, right? Hozuki looked at him inquisitively. This season, it seems, Niji Hyuga's cousin will be introduced. I heard she's perfect. Perfection. Is there a word that reflects reality less than this? Even if it existed, this perfection would still be unsightly. There is nothing more boring than the ideal. Flaws are much more noticeable, they are always discussed. Are you getting married? Sasuke raised his eyebrows and looked at the dice. You have 2, I have 11. Hozuki chuckled. Oh, come on. And lose all the most interesting things? No, Uchiha, you know, I'm a confirmed bachelor. In this we are similar, he began to shake the bones in his hand with special care. However, in other respects, no, I'm not going to be bored. Really? Sasuke snorted. Most of these girls are primitive and monotonous, their mothers are even worse, they will stick to you, you will not get rid of them. And inevitably someone will step on your foot while dancing, and you will still have to apologize for it. If you expect to find someone there who, having looked at you, will not count your annual income and prospects, then your plan is doomed to failure. Damn it! Hozuki exclaimed heatedly, looking at the dice. I bet you're cheating. Now I'll be the one calling the shots. Sasuke just shrugged, not protesting, and took another £5. The boredom was rolling in with renewed vigor. 7, Hozuki announced after throwing the dice, and then replied, well, my goal is certainly not the legs, my friend. Although they're 2, he grinned, if, of course, I can see them under a layer of skirts. But that's not what I mean, sometimes, you know, out of 100 naive and affected ones, there's one who's cheeky. That's when the real fun begins. You got it. I have 9 a chance, Sasuke said, ignoring his opponent's cry of joyful surprise, and rolled his dice again. Bold? He let himself taste the word. Are you going to compromise her? Come on, Uchiha. He snorted. All you have to do is stir her up, set her on fire, deprive her of sleep. Wow. Sasuke looked with some curiosity at the number 7 that had come up. To hit the main number on the second throw and beyond meant losing, while Hozuki, having slapped the table with his palm a couple of times in joy, cried out several times, yes. Yes. I told you so. The gentleman playing whist turned around to look at them without much interest, as if they were disturbing the usual peace, and the one who was losing because of his stupid partner even looked at them with some envy. Sasuke couldn't imagine what there was to envy. Now I'll win it back. Hozuki concluded with a satisfied smile, taking his winnings. So, what I was talking about, to put it briefly, the more impudence she has, the more interesting she is, and that's why I want to tame her, or something. A point for 9, he said with even more excitement. And you enjoy it? Sasuke asked incredulously, giving up in his attempts to understand his friend's motives. Because she's impudent, she'll only be more annoying. Chance, I have 4, you have 7. Hozuki laughed. It haunts you, too bad it's out of place. He rolled the dice again. And you answer, Uchiha, how often has anyone dared to be rude to you? Sasuke frowned, suddenly remembering the unpleasant incident at the Countess's, and then at Akasuna's. Wit and outright impudence are not so far from each other, but the ability to distinguish them and use them correctly is precisely what distinguishes a gentleman from a non-gentleman. However, Uzumaki himself admitted that he is not one. Or did he not admit it? It happened once, Sasuke shrugged. I didn't like it. But tell me, it excites. Hozuki chuckled. In our world, my friend, which extols decency and modesty, willfulness is truly underestimated. Willfulness? Sasuke snorted. You find outright bluntness, which is really just plain rudeness, attractive. Of course, he chuckled, this is just the beginning of the flirting. You're telling me some kind of nonsense. Sasuke shook his head and looked at his bones when Hozuki suddenly cried out in joy. Yes. 10. And you have 9. Haha. Uchiha, you lost. For a young girl, a debut is not only a white dress symbolizing innocence, elbow-length gloves, a delicate string of pearls and ostrich feathers. Not only pleasant excitement, anticipation of a dream coming true and sweet fantasies. A debut is, first and foremost, fear. High society has hardly seen girls in its history who would not care about their own presentation to society. After all, the success of the debut directly affects all her chances of successfully marrying. The career of a man from high society, if he is the eldest son of the family, is, of course, Parliament and the House of Lords, not to mention the management of his own estate and lands. The career of younger sons is service in the army, the navy, or taking the rank. For the gentry, this list is even more extensive. However, a girl from high society, be she the daughter of an aristocrat or a rich merchant, begins her career from birth, all her training in arithmetic, history, good manners, dancing, several foreign languages, as well as playing the piano, drawing, needlework, incessant reading and, of course, the ability to clearly and originally express her thoughts. All this is solely for the purpose of making a profitable marriage. And if she managed to achieve this after her first season, then her career can only be envied. Why are you always looking back? The Countess hissed at Karen, walking along the smooth path to the entrance of St. James's Palace and smiling sparingly at the acquaintances she met. Where is Naruto? The answering whisper was full of barely contained rage. Karen's toilet, it must be said, was simply dazzling. An ivory-colored dress with intricate patterns on the bodice in the form of delicate light pink, almost white, roses reminiscent of whirlpools, sewn by the first chambermaid of London. 3 large white ostrich feathers were carefully woven into her gathered hairdo, which looked especially impressive in the bright red color. Some debutantes looked at her image with envy. I wish you were so eager for him to see your debut and fall madly in love with you, but I suppose your sentimentality still falls short of the level of feeble-mindedness, Lady Senju grumbled. I'm afraid she's at a level close to yours right now, Mamie, because the only thing I can feel right now is rage, Karen almost hissed. He can't miss my performance. And here you are. She heard a familiar ringing voice and, turning around, stretched her lips into a smile, swallowing the burning anger that only her eyes gave away. Couldn't wait for you, came early to see the park. Don't look like that, cousin, someone might decide that your heart is taken. Naruto smiled, which only angered Karen more. He mocked, knowing that she couldn't answer him in any way now, so as not to ruin her image in front of others. How mean. You look simply amazing. I'll stand in a crowd of men and applaud louder than anyone else. Karen looked at her grandmother in horror, who, however, was beginning to be somewhat amused by Viscount Uzumaki's spontaneity, and therefore she was in no hurry to teach him manners, and the Viscount himself would hardly wish to heed her advice, because now he was only joking. Lady Senju, I present Miss Karen Uzumaki, she informed the man standing at the entrance to the lobby, handing him her invitation, and walked inside. To a person who had never been to a presentation of young ladies to court before, the atmosphere that reigned there might have seemed exciting, elevated, and full of the spirit of English aristocracy, where everyone was impeccably polite, witty, and showed no sign of anxiety. Except, perhaps, Naruto's gaze involuntarily caught on a girl standing nearby and standing out a little among the endless smiles and greetings with a distinct fear, as if imprinted on her pale face. Apparently, her younger sister was trying to calm her down, because she was still wearing a short dress, and outwardly she was not much different from her older sister, except that her facial features were a little sharper and, perhaps, even more attractive. Lady Hinata Hyuga, Lady Senju said meaningfully, noticing Naruto's interest. I can introduce you later. Which one? He asked, turning to her in confusion. The eldest, of course. The Countess looked at him with a look that Naruto dubbed for himself as "You're an idiot. You can't notice Hanabi yet." But I noticed, Naruto shrugged. Or does blindness make a person an aristocrat? Oh, not only she, Mr. Uzumaki. Deafness and dumbness are worthy companions for her. The Countess nodded confidently, subtly tapping her cane on the parquet floor in confirmation. I don't want to be a cripple, Naruto snorted and grinned. I think I'm starting to understand what you all lack, you just need to open your feelings to the world. He smiled widely, spreading his arms. Lady Senju continued to stare at him with a fixed gaze and, noticing this undisguised liveliness and freedom in his entire appearance, asked almost with sympathy. Are you sure you're not American, Mr. Uzumaki? Can you practice your irony about English society another time? Karen couldn't resist, her patience only enough to keep herself in check and not to express her excitement too openly. Meanwhile, they were already approaching the wide staircase covered with a red carpet, when the Countess noticed Viscount Uchiha in the crowd. Ah, Itachi, she called, leaning elegantly on her cane. He, noticing them, apologized to the gentleman with whom he had just spoken, and, approaching our heroes, bowed. I dare say that Karen's debut will be the brightest this season, he said, looking at Miss Uzumaki's outfit with a smile, which made her beam. Karen loved attention, like any other girl. And Sasuke won't be there, she asked, but, catching Naruto's warning glance, she turned away. Sasuke is also invited, Itachi replied, nodding with a smile. Although I suspect he will only show up closer to the ceremony itself and is unlikely to stay for dinner. I hope that at least today he will not neglect his uniform, Lady Senju remarked disapprovingly, continuing on her way. Not at all, my lady, the Viscount sighed, easily climbing the stairs. The only thing more stubborn than Sasuke is himself. That will be a hindrance to him one day, Naruto predicted with a grin. Stubbornness usually only affects the stubborn themselves, and no one else. Indeed, Lord Uchiha laughed. I believe you know a great deal about life, Lord Uzumaki, and have an understanding of the many different strata of society, having been one of them yourself. He stopped in the middle of the stairs. Well, we should split up here, my lady. Karen smiled and swallowed nervously, fanning herself. How good that you are here, Itachi, the Countess said approvingly. It will be useful for Lord Uzumaki to make new acquaintances in our society. At these words, she looked at Naruto as if she was threatening to deal with him in the most terrible way if she even caught a glimpse of him behaving inappropriately. Naruto suddenly felt as if she had sent him with Lord Uchiha on purpose, not to introduce him to the world, but so that the Viscount could restrain his impulses and smooth over the unfavorable impression. What a clever woman! Considering all that has been described above, including the excitement and trepidation of Karen and the other young ladies, you, dear readers, must have formed the opinion that the presentation ceremony is a sublime and majestic event, which each and every one in high society awaits with special anticipation. And so it should be noted that, usually, with the exception of the debutantes themselves, this process itself seems to every second person present to be a tiresome and boring tradition, including even the monarch himself. So what can we say about the other men? For example, about people like Sasuke Uchiha, who was now standing surrounded by the peers of England and felt so out of place among them that he even managed to regret that Hozuki was not among them and for that reason could not be present here. "This one is good," suddenly said a squat young man standing next to him, whose name Sasuke had already forgotten during his absence and did not really want to remember. That was Yamanaka Ino, if the person who had just announced her name was to be believed. However, to Sasuke, they had all long since merged into one solid white lace. What the gentleman had defined as good was not so at all to Sasuke. Despite her seeming naturalness, there was a certain swagger in Miss Yamanaka's gait and manner of holding herself, which was certainly not a worthy quality for a girl just entering society. Where had Itachi disappeared to? Sasuke looked around for his brother, hoping to somehow dispel the boredom of the monotonous contemplation of girls, none of whom were able to flawlessly perform what was required of them. And someone else talked about perfection, when the only thing that really caught the eye was the flaws. If Sasuke had been born a girl, he would never have disgraced himself at such a ceremony if he had not honed everything to perfection. He didn't look for Itachi for long, but he was definitely not satisfied with the result of his search, because he was not alone. Next to him, standing, quietly laughing, was the object of Sasuke's uncontrollable irritation, whom he could not even think of calling respectfully, forcing himself to consider him a lord, and even more so, to assign him a peerage. And now his brother was introducing him to not the last people in society. The future counts of Nara and Hyuga, the heir to Baron Inuzuka and even Duke Hatake. This is simply ridiculous. Itachi would be embarrassing himself if he introduced him to them. He's the only one to laugh at. A well-tailored suit cannot cover up ignorance. Well, here is proof. As soon as Uzumaki opened his mouth, everyone immediately smiled from ear to ear, and this blockhead probably also thought that he was extremely witty, and was incredibly proud of himself. He must have said that the dress of the debutante who just came out resembled a duck from behind. Or, that someone's curtsy is more like an ostrich hiding its head in the sand than a graceful swan. Or, that graceful backward steps are more like a circus performance than an official ceremony. And all the rest in the same spirit, as if jokes of this kind had not already been said countless times in the most varied ways and in the most varied forms. And now he will be celebrated in society as a parrot for repeating other people's jokes. However, let's get back to the point, dear readers, because our Sasuke Uchiha was not in a position to think about what he needed to think about. But if at that moment all his thoughts were not occupied with what funny thing Lord Uzumaki could say to other lords, he would have noticed and seen with his own eyes what a ritual of presentation brought to the absolute is, graceful steps, and a luxurious gauze dress with roses, and a natural gait that does not turn into a defiant one, and a graceful smooth curtsy, and respectful deference in his entire appearance when kissing the queen's hand, and a polished light movement to pick up the train in order to modestly step back without tripping over it, and even a joyfully shining look in which self-confidence from the awareness of his own impeccability was not read. And if Sasuke had heard the name of this incomparable debutante, he would have realized that Mr. Uzumaki's look was so important for a reason, because it was not arrogance. It was pride. After all, Miss Karen Uzumaki had just been introduced, his young cousin and, it seemed, his only living relative. Sasuke, really? I was afraid you missed everything. His brother's voice brought him out of his strange reverie, and Sasuke suddenly found himself surrounded by all the people he had just been thinking about. Almost all of them looked at him indifferently and greeted him only because decency demanded it. This happens to everyone who leaves their native places for a long time. In vain does someone think that they are expected there, when a completely new person is received much warmer. Don't most people do the same? He chuckled. Even if they're present, they still let it through. It would be a crime not to notice Miss Uzumaki, Nara chuckled, straightening up. He put his hands in his pockets and looked around without interest. Sasuke remembered that this man was even more bored at such events than he was and, as usual, did not participate in small talk. However, here he was, in a rather ambiguous group of people, discussing the debut of another girl. Even if this girl was Karen. and Sasuke missed her. Well, well. She must be like a sister to you already, Uchiha, Inuzuka remarked with a grin. You have something to be proud of. She already has a brother, Sasuke noted, twitching the corner of his lips. Who will snatch it for himself almost immediately? Inuzuka snorted. Look how I looked, I saw everything. He patted Uzumaki on the shoulder with a laugh. And Lady Senju will not miss hers. So there are only 3 options, Uchiha, either him or one of you. He nodded at Itachi, who did not even react to this remark, if he heard it at all. And of course, the choice of Miss Uzumaki herself is excluded, the Duke said ironically, putting his hands behind his back, watching the next debutante. Despite the fact that he was never seen in the company of girls, he always spoke respectfully of them, which was surprising for a 40-year-old bachelor who was not going to part with his usual life. She is my cousin, Uzumaki frowned. I do not intend to marry her. The Hyuga, for example, also have a cousin making her debut. Are you going to marry her? He looked at the gentleman in question, who merely shrugged his shoulders at these words. I wouldn't want to, he said only, pursing his lips, but I will. Sasuke would have laughed at the absurdity of the situation if it hadn't made him increasingly irritated. Well, he found someone to ask. Why? Uzumaki frowned, directly touching on a topic that was completely unrelated to him. Hyuga chose his words carefully, oh, a lot to my lord. I don't understand you, Uzumaki shook his head. Why should I spend my whole life paying for a couple £100 spent on your education? It's unlikely that this money made the count very poor. Especially since you're related. But he wasn't obliged to do that, Hyuga objected. Benefit or legal enslavement, the Duke said in a low voice, addressing Lord Uchiha. The eternal debate. And the eternal problem of our society, he chuckled in the same low voice. Aren't you grateful to Milady for her assistance? Inuzuka was surprised, turning to Uzumaki. Not everyone gets a chance like this. I am a grateful man, Inuzuka, he smiled. However, if gratitude means that I have to sacrifice something important to me, then I would rather refuse the gift. Why didn't you refuse? Sasuke couldn't help but ask. Wasn't your work important to you? I thought you were proud of it. I'm afraid you misunderstand, Mr. Uchiha, he answered readily. My work is an important part of who I am. Because it's my past. Many people try to forget such a past, Nara noted, looking at him with interest. Interest? Nara. It all almost reached the point of absurdity. And many are not, Mr. Uzumaki, as you can see, Sasuke snorted, not suspecting that he was only giving him a compliment. Well, then you stay, Inuzuka switched again, addressing Sasuke. Uzumaki and Uchiha. This alliance has long been discussed by everyone, right? Unexpectedly, Lord Uzumaki laughed. No, definitely not him, Inuzuka. After all, the one you're setting Karen up with didn't even see her debut. Sasuke caught Itachi's gaze and looked away, feeling anger begin to fill him. He hated being called out. It seems that your cousin, Hyuga, is here now, he said, barely unclenching his teeth to change the subject of the conversation. Lady Hinata looked more inclined to faint than to express reverence. She walked with the light gait not of a dove, but of a ghost, as was hinted at by her deathly pale face, devoid of any expression except fear and the desire to disappear, and her eyes, so bright and large that they seemed like empty white holes. Oh my God, she looks like she's going to fall, Hyuga said anxiously, clasping his hands behind his back. I think you should help her, Itachi said with some doubt. Well, she's not the first girl to ruin her debut. It's not worth making a tragedy out of it, the Duke said with a hint of irony when Lady Hinata finally fell in an attempt to curtsy. However, Mr. Not such as everyone else was already pushing his way forward, paying no attention to anyone. Why doesn't she get up? Nara asked in confusion, squinting in an attempt to see. The people in front of him stirred, starting to whisper. And Sasuke gritted his teeth when Uzumaki was already leaning over the girl, anxiously patting her cheeks. Frowning eyebrows, a concentrated look. All eyes, including the royal ones, were directed at him, but he seemed not to care about them. Hyuga, help me, he called gloomily. I think she's fainted. Fainting is a salvation and an elegant way out of any situation for a girl from high society, and there does not necessarily have to be a good enough reason for it. If there is a gentleman nearby whose favor she is trying to win, or if a conversation with someone goes in a direction that is unpleasant for her, or simply because she suddenly wanted to be the center of attention, suddenly say as if by chance that it is stuffy and her head is spinning, fan herself a couple of times, sigh languidly and easily and at the same time naturally fall onto the parquet, and preferably into the arms of the object of her affection. The picture is classic, but, of course, it is better not to get carried away with it, so as not to cause unpleasant excitement in others because of being near you. However, unlike the cases described above, a real faint is, of course, far from graceful and, worse, may be completely out of place and out of time, and instead of the arms of your beloved, a cold parquet floor will suddenly appear under you, and instead of his worried look, the looks of the crowd, where everyone decides to themselves that you are not the most suitable match for their family. And so, Lord Uzumaki's help to poor Hinata Hyuga was perceived differently by everyone. Some considered it stupidity, some love, some impudence and excessive self-confidence, others even arrogance. However, most agreed that Naruto Uzumaki was a true gentleman who did not abandon a lady in trouble and even in some way increased her chances of finding someone other than her cousin as a husband, an alliance with whom was not particularly desirable for both parties, because heroism is always attractive. And only Sasuke Uchiha was sure that this whole situation was nothing more than a farce, posing, a desire to show off, and at the same time humiliate the others with their helplessness. Although in reality, no one else was given a chance when they broke through ahead of everyone, as if preparing to perform a feat. "Oh, and I don't like unexpected fainting," Hozuki said that evening, when all three inhabitants of the Uchiha house mansion on Piccadilly came together in the club room to play cards. "You never know how to act. It seems like you need to help, but it seems like you don't know her well enough, and someone will certainly decide that this is a good enough reason to marry. Well, so far I've been lucky, and I've managed to lead before the matchmaking began. Did you have time to leave?" Sasuke snorted, hitting a 6 with his jack. "Usually, to prevent this from happening, it's safer not to appear in society at all," he sighed tiredly. "Just thinking about what's about to happen soon gives me a migraine." "Sasuke, no one is forcing you to marry," Itachi argued, tired of this complaint. He had already won the game and was now just watching them, lighting his pipe. "But one day you will fall in love, and I don't want the impression to be that you can't stand society, because then society won't stand you either." "Love? Sasuke?" Hozuki laughed loudly. "Napoleon will win before that happens." "I don't see anything strange about it," Itachi shrugged. "Sasuke is quite a sensual person." "You're not making me look good, brother," Sasuke muttered, taking more cards from the deck. "Anyway," he changed the subject, "I'm not happy that none of you share my opinion of our new acquaintance." "I don't know him well enough to form an opinion," Hozuki chuckled, tossing up the King of Hearts. "But I think he's pretty clever, to figure out what was going on so quickly when Lady Hinata fell. Wasn't she the one they said was a beauty? And the daughter of a count, too. He's got a real grip. He's a smart guy, I like his type." "An ordinary guy, like all the others," Itachi responded without interest. "Except maybe full of strange ideas. But that's understandable, since he didn't grow up among our circle. A year or two, and everything will fall into place. He's a stranger here," Sasuke concluded sullenly, reluctantly picking up the cards, since there was nothing to beat the king with. "Well, that's for sure. But no one obliges you to befriend him. We owe a lot to Lady Senju. But she's not Mr. Uzumaki. You just have to be polite, he's quite harmless." "When he doesn't open his mouth," Sasuke snorted. "I can't stand pretending to be polite if I don't like the person." "Then shut up, that's what you do best," Hozuki laughed, throwing the last card left in his hand onto the table. "Oh, you're so unlucky with sevens, Uchiha." Sasuke sighed again, realizing he had lost, and leaned back in his chair. He didn't want to play anymore. "And yet it is strange," he persisted, fingering the damned King of Hearts in his hand. "Haruno is from the gentry. But they never boasted about the inheritance they received from some merchant, but tried to fit in with their surroundings. And he, literally makes fun of us. Does it bother you?" Itachi chuckled, lighting the remaining tobacco in his pipe. "Come on, Sasuke. Besides, you were the one who started making fun of him, while he supposedly has lands in the Midlands. So, he is still a nobleman, after all. In a sense, even higher than Haruno. He paused, exhaling another portion of smoke, and continued his thought, and it must be difficult to leave everything and find yourself in a circle of people who are not at all happy to see you. Itachi, who are you telling? Sasuke waved his head away. Almost half the village has their eye on Cotton Hill, even though they have nothing to do with him. And every duke has some kind of hope, no matter who his relative is. Who cares whether he's accepted or not, when his eyes are blinded by thousands of pounds? To someone who didn't dream of getting them so easily, I suppose, Itachi shrugged. Why are we talking about this Uzumaki? Hozuki couldn't help but shuffle the deck for lack of anything better to do. You were in St. James just to look at him? So how can it be surprising that you're both single, if you didn't say a word about debutantes? Except for Lady Hinata, who fainted. Didn't anyone else make an impression? Sasuke sighed, a little annoyed that he really hadn't seen anything impressive, even though he should have. Karen wasn't exactly like a sister to him, but the difficult time he had to spend in St. Joyce had made him feel indebted to the Uzumaki family. And while that mostly concerned the Countess, since Karen had been too young at the time, it was still ungrateful to miss her debut. Without a doubt, Karen was inimitable, Itachi noted, feeding his guilt as if it were a given, and glanced sideways at Sasuke, who shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Karen Uzumaki, of course, Hozuki chuckled. She's the one giving the debutante ball, isn't she? Yes, the first ball for Uzumaki, Sasuke muttered reluctantly, clicking his tongue. It's not like that. First, the debut that can't be missed. Now, the ball that can't be missed, and everywhere it's like a punishment. Not a vacation, but a continuous headache. I give you my word that I won't bother Miss Uzumaki, Hozuki immediately swore, knowing the brother's attitude towards this family. You wouldn't have succeeded, Itachi laughed, casually pouring the remaining ash from his pipe into a container. Karen has been passionately in love with Sasuke for a long time now. Hozuki only snorted uninterestedly at this statement. It's not surprising. All the girls near our quarters always chose him. He paused for a moment, but then added, but in the end, they always went to me. Sometimes I think your brother is made of ice and stone, Itachi. Karen is only 18, and those girls were not very smart, Sasuke sighed discontentedly. This simply can't be serious. But then he says something like this, and I'm at a loss, Hozuki finished, looking at his friend with curiosity as if he were an object that couldn't be studied. I told you, Sasuke is a sensual person, Itachi repeated calmly and carefully put his snuff box in his inside pocket. I'm still here, Sasuke stood up, irritated. Oh my god, you're right. Hozuki breathed out in shock, putting his deck aside and moving closer. He even blushed. Wow. Oh, come on, Sasuke shook his head and threw the ill-fated king on the table. I'm going to bed. I'll probably seem crazy, but now I'm intrigued, Hozuki continued, ignoring him. Oh, I really hope this season is fruitful, otherwise I'll never see an Uchiha in love again. You shouldn't have said that in front of him, Itachi chuckled. Now he'll be even more stubborn. Sasuke stood at the threshold for a couple of seconds, wondering how he could tell them that this conversation was making him extremely irritated, so as not to cause even more ridicule, but in the end he just waved his hand and left. He didn't need to explain any more. And the inhabitants of the house on Wimpole Street, not yet having time to fully recover from the introduction ceremony, were already actively preparing for the ball. Lady Senju, accustomed to being the first to open the season, did not change tradition this time, except for a small reservation. Now it would not be just Lady Senju's ball, but Miss Karen Uzumaki's debutante ball. And although the balls on Wimpole Street were always luxurious, the combination of debutante ball still pleased the ears of young Karen, who was already imagining in all colors how Sasuke would propose to her, and then immediately furiously trying to erase this picture from her head. Let Sasuke himself imagine. And she would seem to be demonstratively surprised, dumbfounded, and say, how can this be, my dear Sasuke? We were so close. Have you really been waiting for me all this time? No, that won't do. She would say, oh, my dear Sasuke. I would never have agreed if I hadn't known how it could hurt you. At this point, she would be overcome by a stupor, because all these words were certainly beautiful, but she couldn't imagine that she would say something like that herself. Of course, her grandmother had taught her how to refuse tactfully, but no one had explained how to behave when she wanted to agree. And that was the greatest mistake, because everything she thought she would actually say was nothing but refusals, and it would be good if they weren't imbued with the ironic condescension of her dear Mamie. That simply couldn't be. Karen didn't realize that she was standing in one place, staring at one spot, while the head chef had been waiting for her wishes regarding the menu for several minutes. "My lady," he finally called when the pause dragged on. Anything could have happened in the kitchen without him. "Terrible!" Karen exclaimed, handing him back the list of dishes she had compiled with feeling. "Chicken, my lady?" The cook was surprised. "Or duck with apples?" "It's all terrible, Mr. Akimichi," she threw up her hands in despair. "I'll never get married." The cook blinked his eyes in confusion, not knowing what to answer, but Lord Uzumaki was just coming down, smiling charmingly when he saw them, and immediately assumed the appearance of a businessman and master of the house who could solve any problems. The servants liked the young lord, because he always knew how it should be, and made sure that everything was so. And although the female part of the house was still responsible for the food and the guests, the understanding that she now had a solid support greatly strengthened her spirit. Because the old Viscount Ashina Uzumaki, before he died, had already been in bed for several years and had stopped doing housework even earlier. "So, what's the matter here?" Lord Uzumaki asked, barely managing to say hello. "Miss Karen claims that the menu is so awful that she will not marry because of it," Mr. Akimichi shared, somewhat annoyed. And he added, more quietly, "Please don't take this as impertinence, my lord, but I think she's about to have a fit of hysterics." "Ah, Mr. Akimichi, understand, it's not about the menu at all," Karen said with feeling and turned to her cousin, Naruto. "Tell me, am I good?" Naruto, who was reading the menu at that moment, looking for something she might not like, raised his head in surprise, then chuckled and returned the sheet to the chef, who was stunned by the question. "You'd better talk to Lady Senju about this, Akimichi," he ordered and carefully took Karen's elbow, leading her away, because Mr. Akimichi was following them with a very interested look. "You were undoubtedly the best, sister," Naruto said quietly. "I'm not your sister," she snorted in response, trying to pull her elbow out of his hand. "I don't have any brothers, and why is everyone so eager to force them on me? First Itachi and Sasuke, now you." No. We can't be family." "Well, we can," she immediately corrected herself in a slightly different tone, but not in that sense, and, pausing, she quickly added, "and not with you." So many complications and stipulations, Naruto laughed, going upstairs so as not to disturb the servants with his presence. He was still surprised that there were so many of them here, when his only subordinate in the Midlands was the manager. "For someone who didn't even see you come out." "Sasuke was there, I know it," she gasped, opening the door to the living room. "Why are you trying to break us up?" "Because, dear Karen, it would be better if he were just a friend to you, or even a brother, but I don't want you to be deceived about him. If you only think about him, then you will definitely never get married," he predicted sternly, and then relaxed in his chair. "And you, by the way, really were incomparable. I'm sure that after the ball, there will be no room for suitors here." Naruto glanced around the half-empty room, "and then your head should be occupied with who to choose from among them all." "Don't show weakness, Karen," he warned. "Especially in front of men." Karen, who was about to vehemently protest in defense of Mr. Sasuke, suddenly stopped in the middle of the room, staring at her cousin in surprise. "Not to show," she frowned. "What a fabrication. I was always taught the opposite." "But are you weak?" Naruto raised his eyebrows. "Of course not," she snorted. "But men don't need to know about that." Naruto laughed, shaking his head. "And how do you then imagine your union with someone?" Karen just pursed her lips, she had no idea. "Ah, Karen," Naruto sighed. "I'd tell you how I imagine it to be, and how it will most likely actually be, but I won't. I'll just repeat what I said, don't show weakness." "But then no one will ask me to marry them," she said cautiously, sitting down on the bench. She didn't understand why her cousin didn't want to finish the sentence. "Let the one who can make you happy invite you. Not the one who finds you convenient," Naruto smiled and cleared his throat. So, was that all your horror was, or was the menu to blame? Although I don't remember a kimchi cooking badly. Now, Karen said sarcastically, throwing up her hands, it's even worse. Why are you questioning everything I've been taught? You. What do you know about this? I have absolutely no idea how I should act. Where have I ended up? Is this still my home or a colonial settlement in India? Lady Senju appeared in the doorway of the living room, glaring at them both with a reproachful look. What are those cries I hear, may I ask? Karen, have you caught the provincialism from Mr. Uzumaki? Why are servants pestering me with questions that you are responsible for? Karen fell silent, offended, while Naruto himself, whose property had just been verbally deprived and whose upbringing had been questioned, was not at all upset, but on the contrary, was even glad of the Countess's arrival. How good that you are here. He immediately stood up with readiness. It is worth noting that mobility suited him better than sitting empty in one place, and therefore this movement did not look fussy, but rather the opposite, natural. Your help is exactly what we need. He waved his hand, pointing at Karen. Unfortunately, I am not a master in the field of female hysterics. Can you imagine, Mamie? Karen couldn't resist, starting to pace nervously around the room. Apparently, restlessness was a family trait of all Uzumaki. Naruto says that I shouldn't be weak in front of men. He did it on purpose, to confuse me even more. And I was worried that I didn't know how to agree to a proposal. And now I don't even know how to get it. Lady Senju listened to her granddaughter in silence, and then, looking sideways at Naruto, said, It seems that you are a master after all, Mr. Uzumaki, if you were able to bring her to this very hysteria. Naruto only shrugged guiltily at this statement. I told it like it is. What is my fault if you teach girls something that does not make them happy? Mr. Uzumaki, the Countess clicked her tongue, shaking her head, if everyone taught others what brings happiness, then you and I would have long ago shared the fate of Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette, the last king and queen of France under the old regime, convicted and executed by guillotine after the French Revolution. I'm afraid, Lady Senju, I'm not sure I would be in King Louis's place, Naruto chuckled. I have nothing against change. In that case, you don't really want to proclaim yourself emperor? Referring to Napoleon, the Countess raised her eyebrows skeptically. Oh, I hate you! Karen exclaimed, throwing up her hands. You drive me crazy with your talk. Lady Senju sighed as she looked at her granddaughter. Stop hanging around, Karen, and calm down, you're making my head spin. Better yet, play us something, she grumbled discontentedly, pointing to the piano. Indignant at such obvious disdain, Karen huffed and puffed in place for a few moments, but sat down at the instrument. And when the first sharp notes from the pianist's excessive emotionality rang out in the room, the Countess, wincing, turned to Naruto. Why are you fooling the girl, Mr. Uzumaki? She asked bluntly. Am I fooling her? Naruto was surprised. On the contrary. I wish her happiness. Happiness? Snorted the Countess. Mr. Uzumaki, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but in our society happiness can be found anywhere, except in marriage. For example, how many women have you had? Somewhat taken aback by such unexpected frankness, Naruto stood for a few seconds, staring blankly at the Countess, after which he grinned and briskly sat down in the next chair. How does this relate to our conversation? He asked, without answering the question asked. What I mean is, Mr. Uzumaki, it doesn't matter whether it's you or any other man, you always have someone on the side. And certainly none of you would choose someone who would greet you at home with scandal and hysteria. To this Naruto only chuckled and shook his head. If they need a silent woman at home, then don't they go to the side to those who behave artlessly around them? And aren't there many who cheat among married women? And I'll tell you the reason, those who are already married are self-confident, self-sufficient and not afraid to be themselves. But the trouble is not with those they married, and if they were more natural from the very beginning, then there would be no need to regret them. Your misfortune is entirely contrived, senseless and absurd, if you look at it from the outside. Are you a weak woman? Lady Senju looked at him even with surprise. I'm already old and, moreover, I've been a widow for decades, and therefore I can afford everything that Karen cannot afford. Then I shouldn't envy her future husband, Naruto chuckled. After all, every day he will be reproached for still being alive. The Countess shrugged, looking at Karen, whose playing had smoothly changed from harsh to pleasantly lively, and still couldn't hold back a smile. I don't know what irritates me more, Mr. Uzumaki, the fact that you, surprisingly, turn out to be right every time, or the fact that I'm starting to like you. So, the London season could finally be considered officially open. Morning promenades in Hyde Park, picnics, receptions and dinner parties, theatrical performances, opera, ballet, concerts, royal races and, of course, balls. This is what was already awaiting our heroes, and what some of them themselves were waiting for with no less ardor. However, all these entertainments were not the most important event in their lives. Yes, this is their first season, but far from the last, and they will still have time to get tired of all this. But still, what you look at for the first time with a look not blurred by the endless series of everyday life, imprints itself deeper in the soul, the more you are involved in it. As is also true that you yourself, so inspired, can unexpectedly find yourself imprinted in someone's heart. But there is still plenty of time before that happens, dear readers. In the meantime, we will return to Wimpole Street, where a small, motley family, which was not even a family in its own right, was already beginning to receive guests for the first ball of the season. And while everyone was happy for Karen, who was meeting all her acquaintances at the front staircase with the Countess, happy at the sight of her friends, who she was used to seeing only at children's balls, and the gentleman whose attention she now had every right to, your unfortunate author is quite ready to sympathize with our other hero. And although you could probably decide that this refers to our famous anti-lighthead Sasuke Uchiha, to whom, of course, we will return, now we are not talking about him, but about Naruto Uzumaki. Perhaps some of you would think, why should we sympathize with him? After all, he is a master at playfully settling any matter, big or small, regardless of conventions, propriety, and the efforts required to resolve it. And the problem was this. It just so happened that gifts from fate did not usually fall on Mr. Uzumaki's head, and so from an early age he was accustomed to achieving everything himself. And although before he simply did not have time to think about it, now, standing in the living room in an impeccably tailored suit, which did not cause any inconvenience at all, and talking with a couple of gentlemen, and suddenly realizing that something was still wrong, it was finally time for him to indulge in that very reflection that sooner or later befalls everyone, even if it previously seemed that this activity required a certain kind of character or mind. And it was precisely this conversation in which he took part that prompted him to think. And it was not so much the level of education that was clearly evident in the dialogue, but how boringly it was conducted. Liveliness, charm, cheerfulness, they were simply not there. These qualities important for a gentleman gave way to conservatism, snobbery, and a conviction carefully veiled behind a polite smile that there was no place for someone like him here. And here Naruto was overcome by a contradiction. Despite the fact that for some time now he had been confident that if he had saved up the necessary capital and bought a mansion, he would have been much more satisfied with his situation, the current circumstances, as well as the disdain of those around him, gradually accumulated irritation in him towards high society, which was very reluctant to accept new faces into its circles. And this irritation was especially directed at Sasuke Uchiha. And although he was the only one who did not smile hypocritically in his eyes, still the fact that he was the first to express an idea that Naruto was not ready for at that moment made the blood boil in his veins every time he met him, and awakened an unnatural desire to prove that he was wrong. But there is nothing to be done. It would be very stupid to start saving up for your own plot of land now that you are known as Viscount St. Joyce. And it is impossible to leave Karen to decide her own fate, and knowing the Countess, she will certainly intend to arrange a marriage with that very unflattering object, which everyone will certainly regret in the end. Meanwhile, the guests kept arriving, and here everyone could sympathize with Naruto, because he had to remember new faces, names, surnames, and in addition, titles at once, and not mix them all up in his head. And when everyone moved to the ballroom, where Lady Senju and Karen soon appeared, all Naruto was absolutely sure of was their names. Well, and that he would hardly dare to address anyone today. Karen, however, was not in a good mood, but she tried hard to hide it, and for that, not to catch Naruto's eye. And so, she was already dancing her first square dance, flashing a charming smile, managing to exchange a few words with each gentleman before changing her partner, and, obviously, she was not looking for a rest in this. But Naruto still had no trouble figuring it out. The Uchiha were late, and she couldn't help but be angry about it. Maybe Sasuke was late, but Itachi wasn't like him in that way. And Naruto himself, unexpectedly for himself, realized that he really did miss them. Because in his own house he suddenly found himself the only stranger to everyone else. And although not the support of the older brother, but even one small squabble with the younger one could cheer him up quite well. Lady Senju was actively busy watching her granddaughter, and not even a couple of caustic words addressed to Naruto escaped her tongue today. In short, this is how the season began for our heroes, with disappointment. "I didn't think you were the type to get bored in company," someone said over Naruto's shoulder. He turned around in surprise and saw Nara, whom he had met at the ceremony at St. James's Palace. Even though they didn't know each other very well, it was still a relief to see a familiar face among this crowd. "Me?" Naruto smiled. "I'm definitely ready not to be bored, for your information, Nara. But it seems to me that people here are used to the opposite. I hope you're not one of them?" "Well, I'll disappoint you in that, I don't like dancing," he shrugged, and suddenly sighed wearily, noticing something in the crowd. "And I'm afraid I've come too early." "Early?" Naruto was surprised and looked at his watch. "How early is it if it's almost 11? They're already dancing the second square dance." "Lively dancing is rather problematic in my opinion," he responded. "Frequent changes of partners drive me crazy." "What, are there no more of your new acquaintances?" he asked suddenly. "Uchiha? Inuzuka? I guess they're late," he shrugged calmly. "I can't believe this fate befalls me," Nara said tiredly. Naruto smiled in confusion, and when he looked away again, he finally noticed. "Well, Uzumaki, I don't envy either of us." Nara slapped him on the shoulder and assumed his most benevolent appearance, if that's what you could call an expressionless face and tired eyes. And the ladies were already approaching them with their daughters, as if they had decided to walk past them by accident, which meant only one thing: they were waiting to be introduced to Naruto. Or, which was more reflective of reality, to Viscount Uzumaki. Here again a series of acquaintances began, only this time with the female half of the guests, seasoned with coquettish smiles, polite compliments, and here and there even open flattery. And although Nara was annoyed that he was drawn into an acquaintance, Naruto was not against plunging into a relaxed conversation, which quickly dispelled the strange thoughts that were not accustomed to being in his active head. But still, the abundance of sweet sounds soon threatened to turn into nausea, and, having invited some particularly active girls to a couple of meaningless dances, Naruto was finally able to free himself from their furious attention to himself, where any of his words could be perceived in a light other than the one in which he wanted to present it. Looking back, he discovered that Nara had deftly disappeared, apparently seizing the moment when everyone was busy presenting themselves in the best possible light. And Mrs. Haruno and her daughter were still nearby. Naruto remembered them for the reason that despite the fact that Mrs. Haruno was quite sociable and kept trying to engage her daughter in conversation, she, however, despite her politeness, unlike the other girls, was not at all eager to charm Naruto, but on the contrary, she kept looking at the doors, as if expecting someone. However, Naruto himself also noticed this sin in himself, but what was surprising? When there are so many unfamiliar faces around, seeing someone you already know, even if it is unpleasant, greatly raises your spirits. "Are you expecting someone, miss?" "A friend, perhaps?" He decided to keep the conversation going. The girl shuddered slightly, as if waking up, and suddenly became embarrassed, blushing. "Yes, of course, a friend," she drawled. And then she changed the subject. "This is your first ball, right, my lord?" "The first," Naruto agreed, smiling. "Have you ever been to a ball before?" No, I didn't go out." She carefully moved her shoulder, glancing at the door again, and at that moment it was as if she disappeared from Naruto's circle, because, apparently, she forgot where she was and with whom, frozen like a statue. Turning to the door too, Naruto saw that the Uchiha had arrived. Latecomers are usually not noticed, but this clearly did not apply to these people, because as soon as the dance ended, girls with their ubiquitous mothers gradually began to gather around. Naruto wanted to mockingly laugh at them, but then he noticed that Miss Haruno and her mother began to move in that direction, somewhat disappointing him. And then, becoming serious, he began to look for Karen with his eyes, hoping that she had listened to the voice of reason and was not one of the stupid admirers, but, having found her, he was pleased with her. Although Karen was ready to throw sparks and was struggling with herself with all her might, she still had pride, and so she remained where she was, continuing to talk with one of her friends. "Uzumaki, I've been looking for you everywhere." A strong hand fell on his shoulder. It was Inuzuka. And with him were Hyuga and his sister, looking somehow solemn. Oh, no. When Naruto said that Hyuga didn't have to marry his cousin, he didn't mean that he would marry her himself. Nevertheless, keeping a smile on his face, he greeted them quite friendly and even inquired about Lady Hinata's well-being, and then apologized for interfering. Because Lady Senju scolded him with all sorts of words for this so-called rescue. She said something like, "You weren't even introduced. She's a lady, and you." "Who am I?" he asked defiantly. "You will marry her now." "Absurd. That's not what I'm here for." "Oh, is that so?" she said. "Do you think I need this? I had many expectations of you, my lord, but I certainly did not suspect that you could break hearts so easily." "What are you talking about?" Now it was clear what it was about. The timid look of the large, light eyes, the blush on the plump white cheeks and the restrained, almost awkward, answers made it clear that Lady Hinata already had some hopes. And Hyuga himself, apparently, too, if he so zealously wanted to formally introduce them to each other. Not inviting her to dance now would have been simply impolite, but it was good that our hero did not care about decency. Noticing Karen's gaze in time, he skillfully seized the moment to apologize and quickly leave. What an evening! Every acquaintance was almost an invitation to marry, as if to sign some document. "And here is your wife, take it and sign. And with it comes eternal membership in the gentleman's club." How could it be otherwise? Who in their right mind would be at home with their wife, especially in the evening? It doesn't matter at all that Naruto didn't even remember her name, what she looked like, or even how he met her. But what about the spark that they talk about so much? What about sensual experiences? What about kinship and connection? What about passion? And the madness of love, in the end? However, in society he was gradually gaining popularity as a madman. Although in a good sense, however, madness in English society was not the order of things. Karen was elegantly fanning herself when Naruto approached her. The dance book was neatly tied around her wrist with a lacy tie. And Naruto suddenly thought that her innocent image was completely at odds with her character. There was barely contained violence even in the way she held her head. Even if she wanted to appear weak in front of someone, she would hardly be able to deceive them. "He came," she said, almost accusingly. Her friend had left before Naruto had shown up, so she felt she could afford to be a little sarcastic. "Were you waiting?" Naruto narrowed his eyes, looking at her carefully. She just snorted, turning away. "How can they crowd around him like that?" she asked after she had watched the object of her affection for a while longer. "Exactly," Naruto responded sullenly, catching himself doing the same thing. "I didn't even have time to enter the hall." Karen snorted. "Here's your etiquette expert." Naruto wanted to quip, knowing that latecomers greeted the host first, and only then could flirt as much as they wanted. However, it was worth admitting that they had no choice. The ladies really surrounded the brothers from all sides. And if the older daughter still wanted to get the Viscount as a husband, the younger ones were not at all against an officer. And such an attractive one at that. There was actually someone else with them, and a third one, who actually didn't let the ladies disperse, shooting smiles left and right. Surely, it was that same Hozuki that the Uchiha were talking about, but it wasn't possible to see all of them properly. At that moment, the master of ceremonies announced the Lancers. A pair dance, a variant of the quadrille performed by 4 couples arranged crosswise in a square. The ladies chattering around the Uchiha began to fight even harder for their attention, and some heads turned to look at Naruto. And a young man was already walking towards Karen, who for some reason Naruto did not like. Probably because he was walking with a swaying walk and his awkward appearance would rather ruin the dance than vice versa. "I hope you haven't taken this dance yet?" Naruto asked Karen, tilting his head slightly to the side, without looking at her. "I want to rest," she sighed, shrugging her shoulder. "I would say it differently," Naruto snorted, and suddenly smirked, looking sideways at her. You don't want to have fun. For God's sake, cousin. Karen tried to wave him off, but she couldn't stand his teasing look and finally agreed only out of a sense of contradiction. They walked briskly to the center of the hall past that same awkward gentleman who had lost a potential partner without even having time to make an engagement for her. Invitation to dance. Naruto, however, having angered his cousin, became cheerful. And he bowed with a grin when he saw Karen's eyes burning with anger as she curtsied. He had never been to a real ball before. There had been dances in clubs, salons, opera houses, or hotels, but there it was considered a form of entertainment and nothing more, so Naruto now perceived everything as a pleasant pastime, not suspecting that at a ball entertainment was the last thing you could allow yourself, unless you wanted to become the subject of gossip, of course, or, in extreme cases, get caught up in a scandal. Fortunately, he was still far from understanding all the intricacies and twists in the relationships of the English aristocracy, and therefore he could afford to enjoy the dances. Although your author believes that even if Naruto did understand them, this would not have stopped him from having fun. This mood was involuntarily transmitted to the gloomy Karen, who, allowing herself to be led in short waltz transitions, involuntarily noted with surprise that her cousin, in his sensitivity, was an unusually pleasant partner for dancing. How deftly he caught her hand at the next change of partner, so that she did not have to look for him, how he stood precisely in a line in a square. The form of the formation resembles a square, one pair on each side, and directly opposite their vis-a-vis. The vis-a-vis, that is, the pair located opposite, how easily he adjusted. Remembering the sequence of figures, steps, and turns, how carefree he laughed, mocking her gloom, and harmlessly joked during downtime, not letting her get bored. This could not fail to win her over. And vis-a-vis was truly pleasant in his politeness and liveliness bordering on harshness. For some reason, his bows even seemed a little impudent to her because of the strange smirk that never left his lips every time he looked at her, which made her look at him almost defiantly, but he danced flawlessly, and so she forgave him. And at some point she was already smiling again, grateful in her soul that her cousin had not left her standing in the corner and helplessly watching Sasuke flirt with others. Maybe he wasn't flirting, of course, but that didn't cancel out her anger. It was her ball, and he dared. And for that reason, frankly speaking, Naruto was right after all, she did not want to have fun. However, trusting him was not a mistake, because as soon as they finished the dance, the Uchiha brothers, dressed to the nines, finally broke free with their officer friend, arrived, and meeting them with a smile against the gloomy Sasuke was the best decision. However, it took all of Karen's self-control not to be indignant, because their friend who was blocking Sasuke and Itachi's passage was the same vis-a-vis who had kept his indecently bold gaze on her during their dance. So he was able to find a way to escape, but the others couldn't. "We apologize for being late," the Viscount apologized for everyone, shaking hands with Naruto. "I hope we haven't missed anything important?" "Of course we missed it," Naruto smiled broadly. "That square dance was beyond all praise." "I intend to make up for all that I have missed," said the gentleman with whom they were vis-a-vis, rubbing his hands eagerly. "I have only a few dances left to spare." "When did you manage to do that?" Sasuke looked at him in surprise. "When you were busy trying to get rid of the ladies, I invited them," he chuckled. "A model of decency, by the way," he addressed Naruto, pointing at Sasuke. "I didn't want to talk to anyone without greeting the owner first." Naruto couldn't help but grin, noticing from Mr. Sasuke's face how much he didn't like that wording. "Well, Mr. Uchiha has pointed out my manners to me more than once, so it would be simply unacceptable for him not to follow all the rules himself, wouldn't it?" And, catching his gaze, he added, "But even despite being late, seeing familiar faces here was even nicer than I expected." "Too bad I can't share your joy," he retorted mercilessly. "You don't have to flatter me, Mr. Uzumaki," he snorted. And he probably would have rolled his eyes if decency had allowed it. "I can't stand pretense." "Well, you do seem like a gentleman, Mr. Uchiha," Naruto smiled innocently, tilting his head to the side and looking him over appraisingly. "However, I was telling the truth, whether you believe me or not." Captain Uchiha, after a moment's thought and as if swallowing his contempt, extended his gloved hand. Naruto shook it, even surprised. Oh, was his peacock really susceptible to flattery? Or, even more incredible, did he actually believe him? But the confusion did not last long, because Captain Sasuke immediately said, "Well, I suppose you'll be uncomfortable now, Mr. Uzumaki, since you haven't met my friend yet. Captain Suigetsu Hozuki, younger brother of Sir Mangetsu Hozuki of York," he introduced. "Oh, come on, Sasuke," Lord Uchiha said and shook his head with a sigh, already anticipating another squabble that he didn't want to participate in. "I have never been introduced so offensively before," Captain Hozuki said with a grin, shaking Naruto's hand in turn. "However, I hope that our acquaintance will not be unpleasant, despite the fact that my friend wished us the opposite." "In that case, I should probably be grateful that Mr. Uchiha hasn't had the chance to introduce me yet," Naruto laughed. "I suppose his definitions would be something like idiot and provincial." "I see the Duke," Lord Uchiha said, as if he had found salvation for himself. "I beg your pardon, gentlemen. You think quite highly of yourself." "Mr. Uzumaki," Mr. Sasuke said, as if he hadn't even noticed his brother's departure. "So you'd better avoid me if you don't want to know how I would really describe you." "I'm not one to be scared," Naruto chuckled defiantly. "But you are a stranger here." Naruto froze for a moment, dumbfounded, looking at his opponent's face. He seemed to know exactly where to aim, since Naruto himself admitted that he was glad to see them. Well, that was to be expected. Sasuke Uchiha had an amazing ability to both masterfully invigorate with a quarrel and irritate the hell out of you with it. Words that were not accepted in polite society were already on his tongue, and his fists were itching to hit him properly, but Naruto suddenly came to his senses when Karen discreetly pinched his arm, forcing him to pay attention to her. "Oh yeah. My cousin," he introduced her somewhat coldly. "Miss Karen Uzumaki." The playful smile on Lord Hozuki's lips, who was amused by the argument that had arisen, melted somewhat as he turned his gaze to Karen. Bowing his head, he said, "Oh, so you're the one everyone's talking about. Who's speaking?" Karen squinted suspiciously. "Who?" He laughed. "Sasuke. Itachi. Everyone at the ball? Sasuke?" Karen blinked her eyes in confusion. Hozuki, catching his friend's angry gaze, only smiled. "I'm leaving," he raised his hands. "You know, I still have a waltz free, and by the way, it's next." And he left Sasuke alone with two Uzumaki who had completely opposite feelings for him, while they were mutual only for one of them. And this feeling was no less strong than love. And in its essence it was only an inexplicable rage. And when the silence had already reached its peak, Sasuke, without taking his eyes off Naruto's gaze, which had darkened considerably, said through his teeth, "Karen, do you want to dance?" Could Karen have wished for anything more? To touch his shoulder, to feel his hand on her waist, to walk in time with his steps, to feel his hot breath, she only regretted desperately that their hands were separated by the soulless fabric of gloves, and she could not truly feel their warmth. Sasuke's leadership was impeccable. Karen didn't even have time to think about bumping into someone, because he anticipated every step and deftly led her away from a possible collision. She couldn't say now who was better, Naruto or Sasuke. They were both excellent dancers. What else can a young lady dream of at a ball, except to be enchanted by the waltz of her beloved? And even if the older generation insists that the obscenity of this dance is unacceptable in decent society, that is what makes it all the more attractive? To allow oneself to be whirled around to such an extent that one can no longer see anything except the one beloved face, this is the excitement of the soul that every young lady wants to experience. However, despite all the advantages of her position, Karen did not feel the joy that she expected to feel. She flatteringly noticed the envious glances of Sasuke's fans, and even her own admirers, which could not help but fuel her vanity, but her cavalier's gaze did not show even a bit of interest. He barely had time to concentrate on her face, every now and then running away somewhere to the side. In his appearance one could read only concentration and some concern. And all this was covered by his usual dispassion. "How was your first day?" Karen couldn't tell if there was genuine concern in his tone or if it was just a way to start a polite conversation. "You know how I waited for him," she answered evasively in the end, catching her breath from circling the room too quickly. Sasuke's gaze finally landed on her as the music became more measured, allowing for longer, smoother steps. A crooked half-smile tugged at his lips. Expectations rarely match reality, do they? He chuckled knowingly, stopping and raising their palms above their heads so that Karen could do a tour. A turn or spin around, French, under his arm. Yes, Karen thought to herself. Everything is completely different, the ball, the people here, and even my feelings. The ball, she had thought before, would appear before her as the embodiment in reality of all those fictional stories and real stories that she had read in secret from her grandmother in her room before going to bed. She imagined herself as the heroine of the novels of Madame de Genlis or Madame de Staël. Sometimes she was the witty Mademoiselle de Clermont. Mademoiselle de Clermont 1802, Félicite de Genlis, sometimes the simple-minded Louise de la Vallière. La Duchesse de la Vallière 1804, Félicite de Genlis, who had conquered the heart of the king himself, sometimes poor Delphine. Delphine 1802, Germaine de Staël, and a great many other images popped into her head, throwing her nature, thirsty for romantic adventures, from one extreme to another. But in addition to these, of course, there were other images, the purposeful Duke of Uzes, the noble Louis XIV, the cruel Lord de Mondeville, but most of all she liked to imagine herself as Corinne. Corinne ou Italy 1807, Germaine de Staël, she saw herself in the brightness of her character, her own and her gaiety. Karen dreamed of having her charm. And secretly she was pleased with the thought that Corinne's name was so similar to her own. When Karen was preparing for this ball, she had no idea that everything here would be so ordinary. Maybe she simply imagined too much, but few of them actually managed to attract her attention. Some were too short, others were too thin, others were too poor, others were too old, others didn't know how to dance at all, others had nothing to talk about, and others were indifferent to her. At least 4 people had their eyes on you before you even entered the hall, Karen decided to joke, hoping to change Sasuke's mood. Really? I didn't notice, he said distantly, which upset her even more, because she was expecting him to say something about her own gentleman in response. The next twist Sasuke had taken her into had narrowly saved her from colliding with another lively couple, and on closer inspection Karen recognized the gentleman as Captain Hozuki, who was enjoying the ball without any shame. And his partner, Miss Harrow, apparently, too. She was certainly not one to be bored. However, I think that those you are talking about, Karen, have already defected, Sasuke suddenly snorted, smoothly extending his hand with her palm to the side so that she, having made an elegant turn, stood next to him. And now Karen could see where her friend was looking. Naruto stood a little further away, surrounded by ladies, and was enthusiastically telling them something, while they were laughing, covering their mouths with fans. Karen barely had time to realize this, when she was already face to face with Sasuke again. She could not express her surprise and therefore remained silent. A title and an extra £1,000, that's the only way to make a match for yourself, Sasuke said. However, simple-minded people probably don't need anything else to be happy. What do you need? The question burst out before she could stop it. Me? He sighed with a grin. So that they would leave me alone. And then Sasuke suddenly let her go, making her stunned for a second, and then exhale nervously when another gentleman took his place. The master of ceremonies today is quite inventive in choosing figures for dancing. There you are, Captain Hozuki chuckled next to her ear. Sorry, did I interrupt your enjoyment of my gloomy friend's company? Not in the way that I must have disturbed you, Captain Hozuki, she said indifferently. Me? He laughed. Not at all. Nothing can spoil my joy, because I intend to invite today all those who managed to intrigue me. Really, all of them? Karen doubted. And you are sure that all of them will have a free dance for you? Captain Hozuki grinned wryly and, after quickly spinning her around in place for 3 wide pas, dance step, French, he took the hand of the next partner, finally casting a long, ambiguous glance at Karen, which could equally be read as mysteriously promising or downright daring. For a few seconds she continued to look towards Captain Hozuki, trying to understand what he meant, but he seemed to have already forgotten about her, smiling again at his frivolous Miss Harrow. Karen snorted, and only when the cheerful couple left her field of vision due to the forced tour that her partner had dragged her into did she finally come to her senses. I don't understand your friend, she said with a sigh. Sasuke was holding her hand again, and when, during the rotation, he found himself opposite the place where, as Karen already knew, Naruto was standing, His gaze slid behind her back. And I'm yours, he answered through clenched teeth. What's wrong with Naruto? Karen really didn't understand now. Looking at her, Sasuke suddenly frowned, pursing his lips. Karen, he said suddenly, seriously. You should be wary of him. Why should I do this? Sasuke paused, once again following Naruto with his eyes behind her back. And he answered with even greater ferocity. He can turn your head. Naruto. Turn heads. Karen barely held back a laugh. How self-confident these men are if they think that they turn women's heads, when in fact it's quite the opposite. How funny, she chuckled. He says the same thing about you. Apparently, he knows me well. Sasuke seemed offended because he did not take his eyes off Karen for 2 tours in a row. Oh, Sasuke, is that jealousy speaking in you? Karen looked at him with wide eyes. But, as luck would have it, it was time to change partners again, and Karen caught herself thinking that Captain Hozuki's face was unbearable to her. At least at that moment, for sure. Your gaze is spitting sparks, he remarked with a grin. I hope your anger is not caused by me, Miss Uzumaki? Does it really matter, Captain Hozuki? Karen seemed to put more condescension into her words than she had originally intended. But you said that nothing could spoil your joy. And yours is so changeable, he smiled carelessly. On the Lancer you greeted me with a smile, and now I am glad at least because I am alive. A waltz and a quadrille are different dances, Captain Hozuki, Karen said almost through her teeth, trying to keep a polite smile on her face. Yes, and partners too? More than Captain Hozuki's face, Karen suddenly realized she couldn't stand his grin. How dare he look at her so defiantly? A wave of indignation rose up inside her every time he grinned at her like that. So brazenly, so openly, so insolently. I'm afraid I expressed myself incorrectly, Karen, Sasuke said again. It's my anxiety that's speaking. Having appeared out of nowhere, he certainly won't want to marry someone who is below him in status. People like him usually like to flaunt their wealth and will never marry girls with a dowry of less than 3,000 pounds. Captain Hozuki is rich? The younger brother of a baronet? Karen seemed to be really dizzy. Before she could realize one thing, she was already being told another. Who are you talking about? Still about your cousin, Karen, Sasuke replied tensely, supporting her back. Dear Sasuke, she sighed tiredly, you just said that you don't understand him, and now you talk about him as if you've known him all your life. She suddenly laughed lightly, shaking her head. You deserve each other. I once read that if 2 people don't like each other, you shouldn't listen to either of them. You know, that's what I'll do. Meanwhile, Naruto, instead of indulging in a completely natural melancholy, contrary to the words of Captain Sasuke, decided to find a way to prove to anyone, including himself, that he could very well become one of his own in this new society for him. The ladies of high society, he now discovered, except for their expressiveness of speech, differed little from those to whom he was accustomed. If one ignored the importunity of some, the polite courtesy of others more than compensated for their shortcomings. To some extent, this even flattered him. No one dared to point out to him his lack of education or anything else that was so objectionable to those he had met earlier. Duke Hatake, with whom he had managed to exchange a few remarks, even asked what club he belonged to. And upon learning that Naruto had not yet considered this leisure activity for himself, he advised him to join those to which he belonged, and even gave him business cards. Miss Haruno, who Naruto gave a chance to again, turned out to be a pretty good conversationalist, if, of course, she wasn't daydreaming. Occasionally throwing a quick glance at the dancers and blushing. As it turned out, she was from the gentry, which had already won Naruto over, who stubbornly ignored both Captain Sasuke's glances in their direction and Miss Haruno's return glances. If there was some kind of secret connection between the two of them, then it was not for him to judge them, but, of course, the caustic remarks about his origins now seemed even more humiliating, because Miss Haruno herself could not boast of her tree. But here was a small opportunity to take revenge, to make her just a little jealous, let her watch, let her think that he was capable of taking away someone else's lady. Let him be afraid of him. Do you often come to London? He asked, smiling, looking at the graceful curve of her shoulders and the open neckline of her dress. How beautiful she was. And how absurdly that